Hello there. This is Jen T. Grace, founder of Publisher Purpose, and I am sitting with Patty Gilbride today, and we are talking about your book, Patty, Something More Than Love, which I am delighted that I actually have the book that I can show up, which is very exciting. I want to dive right in. I want to just start with like a little bit of who you are, and then we'll dive into all the details of this book.
Great. Okay. So I am, I live at the beach right now. I lived in New Jersey for the better part of my life. Spent 25 years in law enforcement, working for the sheriff's department. It's actually how I met my husband. And then retired down here 10 years ago. Avid animal lover, figured I would spend my retired days, helping at the shelters, dog shelters, rescuing birds. We have a fabulous bird rescue sanctuary down here. And, riding my bike, going to the beach. And then life kind of turned around about maybe 5 years into retirement. So, and now all of a sudden I'm an author.
Yeah. This is going to be a lot to unpack. So,
Yeah.
The book is called Something More Than Love, which everyone can see. But the subtitle is When Your Husband Dies and Takes Half Your Heart with Him. Right. And we were just before we went live, we were talking about how hard it was to land on that subtitle. But I feel like when people hear that subtitle, it's immediate of, oh, that's what this book is about. Has that been your experience so far with people who have picked up the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when I talk to somebody and I say I wrote a book and they, oh, you wrote a book, what's the name? And I say Something More Than Love. And I think they immediately conjure up, sweetness and flowers and, happiness. And then I read the subtitle to them and I follow that with, my husband passed away, 14 months ago, 15 months ago, which it's now 15 and a half months ago. And they immediately, their face kind of turns, like, oh, I'm so sorry. But that subtitle, it was perfect. It was perfect because I remember PYP saying, you really want people to understand the contents of the book because Something More Than Love could be about, dogs. I mean, it could be about gardening. It could be about anything. And I went through so many things, trying to pull in the fact that, I was an advocate and caregiver for my husband and cancer treatment and so many different aspects that I wanted to pull in as many people as possible because I have so much to say in this book. But my book from day one has been a love story. And that is the number one thing I want people to get out of it is that it's a love story. So the way I came up with that subtitle is I stopped thinking about it and I let my heart figure it out. And that's what spilled out.
Yeah. And I'm happy that, even if it took longer than you would have hoped, I'm glad that everyone landed on something that's just so clear and so perfect. And so let's just go back a little bit because you said it's been 15 and a half months. Because if we think about that is not a long time.
No.
And you have a finished, published 418-page book that is in our hands, right?
Right.
So what prompted you to start chronicling this journey?
Good question. So I started writing the book. The book is in a journal format, like a diary format. I started 6 weeks before Dave ultimately died. Was when when we started with palliative and hospice care. And I had my sister-in-law actually is an editor and she had said, you've got a book in there in your brain. And I'm like, no, I'm not a writer. Just because I can write a decent email doesn't mean I can write a book. And I really just felt one day I needed to sit down and I needed to write. Like I just sat down and with my computer on my lap and I just started writing what happened that day. And of course I had all this history that I wanted to get in there. And I just wrote every day. And I wrote, I did, of course, I didn't write for about 3 days when Dave passed. It was actually really, my brain was exploding because I had all this information that I needed to get down on paper. And ultimately the book covers about 6 months, a 6 month period of time of my before, my during, and my after. And then that was it. And then next thing you know, it was all about, self-editing, finding you, publishing, and going on with that process.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you said that it's kind of like a 6 month time frame, because I feel like that puts it into more, I don't know, just like a better to wrap your head around as a reader standpoint, because this easily could have chronicled 18 years, could be 50
Yeah.
years, right? Like where it is. And I think because it is such a short window of time, the intensity, I feel like, is even more apparent in it.
Right. I wanted to, when I actually first started writing, it really, like, I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to write a book. I sat down to write a journal, a very personal journal. And I didn't know if I would share it with anybody. And I wrote it for me. I wrote it for me because I wanted my love story on paper. And, but I did hope that if I shared it, that I would be able to share my love story or our love story with the world. And I would be able to share how that loss hurts so much more when you love that hard. And I was hoping I'd be able to say that you actually can survive the grief, but I really didn't know if I would be able to say that because I wasn't at that point yet. So I had no idea. But I was hoping that's what I'd be able to say. And you're absolutely right. It could have gone on for 18 years because I remember thinking eventually I don't write every day, but I write, every couple of days and then maybe once a week, because sometimes it was just the same thing every day. And there was nothing that I felt that I really needed to get down on paper. But I remember thinking, well, where am I going to stop? Like, it's not like I'm going to stop writing when I'm done grieving, because that doesn't happen, really, that in when it comes to grieving for somebody you love that much, you don't ever stop grieving. It's always just a part of you. So I ended up stopping. I finished. I thought I found the perfect stopping point. There was no epiphany. There was no aha moment. But I thought, oh, this is probably a good moment to stop. And I put the book down and I put it away for a month. And then the last chapter happened. And then the last chapter, I thought, and I sat and I wrote. And I think the last chapter is like 15 pages long. And I said, that is the perfect place to end the book. And then I was completely satisfied and confident that was where I needed to wrap it up.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, one of the things, so that before we hit record, you use the phrase, make them feel. And I wrote it down because I was like, there's something really powerful about this, because I think even as you were just saying, you're not a professional writer and you're like, I was doing this for myself. But what I feel like your book does that so few books are capable of actually doing is really making people feel. Because when you and I first connected, and I was very transparent, and I'll say this even though it's, everyone can watch this, is that I don't have an opportunity to read all of the things that come across my desk. I don't have enough time. And that's why we have an amazing team who can support these things. And for whatever reason, when I got yours, I just happened to have time because I was flying. And I'm like, you know what? Let me just open it and read it. And I remember emailing you, and I know that you even wrote it in the book itself. Like, I was crying while I was flying, which is not, my favorite thing to do, but it's certainly happened in the past from my own grief. Because cancer is such a big thing that impacts so many people in so many different ways. And I feel like the way that you chronicle it is just so personal and so detailed that it's almost like you can't not feel, because I think that we hear like, oh, so-and-so was just diagnosed, or so-and-so's caregiving for this person, but we don't really know what their day-to-day looks like, because they're trying to gloss it over and they're not giving all of that rawness and that realness, that I feel like your book strikes this very beautiful balance of giving those raw details that are so heartbreaking, and then also flashing back to like happier times, so that way you're not like completely sad the whole way through, even though it's definitely a lot. So, even thinking about the feedback that you've had, because the book is just still very, very new, very, very fresh. And I know that, for other people who are widowed, it's definitely something that people are reaching out to you on. But you had also mentioned that, people are finding that they do want to take it a little bit slow and they don't want to kind of digest it all. So can you just kind of share a little bit more about what these conversations have been looking like?
Yeah, I've had several people. Well, so I had a woman reach out to me who she found me on Facebook and messaged me. And she actually had lost her husband 5 weeks ago. She lost her husband on New Year's Day. At least at the time she
Mhm.
reached out to me, it was 5 weeks. And I remember thinking, wow, I don't know if this book will be ideal for her because she's at 1 month. Like I remember how I was at 1 month. And, we went back and forth and chatting and ultimately she read the book. She got back to me in a week and she said, your my words were coming out of your mouth.
Mm,
Everything I read in the book, this was like my story with Doug. And she felt so comforted because not everybody has the same voice that I have or the opportunity to get those words out there.
mhm,
A friend of mine just last night, she texted me and she's reading the book and she said, I'm watching the boys play basketball. I'm sitting on the bleachers crying. And I just kind of
mm,
smiled and I said, take it slow. Another girlfriend of mine, she's a teacher and a very avid reader. She's got 40 books on her to read list for the year. She's upping it from like 25 last year. Eh, God bless her. And I said, so I'm pestering her. I'm like, have you read it yet? Have you? Because she knocks out a book every couple of days.
mhm,
And she said, I got to take this slow. She's
mm,
like, I'm at the point where Dave isn't going to be here much longer. And
mhm,
I really need to take this slow.
mm,
So I've had at least a half a dozen people in the last week reach out to me and just
yeah,
say, I feel like I am in the book. I feel
mhm,
like I am, and these are people that know me and people that don't know me.
mhm,
I feel like I'm in the book. You're making me feel it, and I think there's some comfort for people that have been through this,
mhm,
because that window at the end, the this 2 week window where Dave was in at home hospice care, where things were getting dire, where changes were happening,
mhm,
transitioning was happening, are something that nobody wants to talk about. And
mhm,
nobody wants to talk about end of life,
mhm,
and what that
mhm,
represents to the body, what it represents to the people that are left behind.
mhm,
It's just unfortunate that in our culture, it's not an okay conversation to
mhm,
have. And we end up being so unprepared for what's about to happen. I read the little blue book that hospice gave me
mhm,
explaining what transitioning was and that you're
mhm,
going to see this is going to happen and this is going to happen and this is going to happen. But there was this whole slew of things that happened that weren't in the book,
mhm,
and I'm this black and white researcher. I Google everything. I look
mhm,
everything up. What do you mean it's not in the book? How could this,
mhm,
what's going on here?
yeah,
And So I wrote about all those things. I
mhm,
wrote about those things and how I felt so out of control, that they were happening. And of course, at this time, Dave is slipping further away from
mhm,
me. And of course,
mhm,
I don't have him, he was my person to share
mhm,
all my little idiosyncrasies and my little control things.
yeah,
He was my guy to talk me off the ledge. And
mhm,
now my talk me off the ledge person is the person that I'm losing.
mhm,
I hope one of the many things that I hope that come out of this book is that we have these conversations
mhm,
I read like a dozen books after Dave died, and I'm really not a reader, to tell you the truth. Three of them were Elizabeth Kubler-Ross books. And
mhm,
for anybody that knows who or doesn't know who she is, she really is just like the matriarch of writing about the
dying,
process of dying and the
mhm,
process of grieving. And so the first one that I read on death and dying was about the 5 stages of grief,
mhm,
which I always thought pertained to the griever, the person that
mhm,
was left behind. And it
yeah,
doesn't. It pertains to the person that is dying.
yeah,
So I asked a friend of mine who's a hospice nurse, did you have to read this book when you went to school? And she said, no, I didn't. Did read it on her own, but she didn't. I asked a oncologist that I know. I said, "Have you ever read this book? Have you ever read any Elizabeth Kubler-Ross?" No, no, he hasn't. So,
mhm,
I'm wondering if this is something like I think it should be required reading. I really do. I mean, if you're going to be an oncologist,
mhm,
a lot of your cases are going to be terminal. I think you
Mhm.
need to know about the 5 stages that your patient's going to go through, and that
Mhm.
they're not going to be linear. They're going to be up and down. And I think you need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting is that I had a minor in sociology in college and we read all of her books. Like that was,
Wow.
I remember doing the specific course that was on death and dying was specifically because of her book. And I remember reading that as a sociology student. So it seems baffling and mind-boggling to me that people in the field are not required to read those things. And I think and like I was saying, I think it is because you chronicled it in such like painful to read detail in some cases. But that is what's going to make more doctors, hospice nurses, people who are support staff for someone in that, or the partner, the wife, the son, the daughter, the sister, the brother, whomever it might be, who is actually around somebody. And I think that that is why this does make a really good, important read for people to just to be able to have a little extra bedside manner even, right? Like, because
Right.
there's that, because that's a whole, there's pieces of that in there too. But like just to be able to see like what does it actually look like from their perspective and the person caregiving for them. It just, I don't know
Right.
why this is not, and we've had these conversations, like I don't know why this has not been just part of curriculum. It just seems so
Right.
obvious, so missed. And you do it in a way that, because it is a love story, right? Like you're not forcing your story on someone else. Like, so any student who is in oncology could read this and just really empathize and relate to and take that with them in their future studies without it feeling like, oh, I
Yeah.
got to read this textbook. Because like a textbook, I don't think is actually going to create the level of empathy that is
Right.
required to be in those situations.
Right. Yeah, I think, I think a lot, of course, our medical providers nowadays, I get it. They've got so much on their plate. There's so much
Mhm.
for them to learn.
Yeah.
They're guided by insurance. They've got 15-minute blocks, to see people and
Mhm.
take care of all their needs. But unfortunately, I think they sometimes don't realize that when you walk out of that room, you have a whole life that happens. And
Mhm.
if you are a cancer patient, you're probably seeing them once every 3 months, which would be the typical amount of time for scans.
Mhm.
And those 3 month scans, your life revolves around those next 3 months.
Mhm.
You've now just gotten your blood result, your blood work done, maybe your PET scan, your CT scans, your MRIs, you know what you're looking at. You either walk out of there feeling great and optimistic, because it was a good visit,
Mhm.
or it was not such a good visit. And you go home deciding, well, what can I do, for the next 3 months? At least if you're wired like me, you go home saying,
Mhm.
what can I do? Because I'm a
Mhm.
doer. And,
Mhm.
you're thinking, well, you've got this appointment now on the calendar, and of course you'll have to make hotel reservations because you stay overnight because it's 3 hours away from you.
Mhm.
And your whole life revolves now around this cancer for you and your husband. And your provider um, doesn't think about you for 3 months.
Mhm.
Like you're done, you're out the door. Now my providers were exceptional, and I use the patient portal constantly, so
Mhm.
I probably was in their mind constantly.
Mhm.
But I'm also really pushy, for lack of a
Mhm.
better word. I'm just really pushy when it could.
Mhm.
And when it came to my husband's health, and you know what? Every last one of them has said, I hope if I'm ever in Dave's shoes, so to
Mhm.
speak, my wife
Mhm.
does just what you did.
Mhm.
That the person that cares for me is just like you. So I don't have any regrets for being that, that
Mhm.
pushy advocate at all, because
Yeah.
I think it served us well. Um, but yeah, I'd like more doctors. I'd like to see young doctors read this book.
Mhm.
I mean, I think
Mhm.
they'd enjoy, I'm sure they have enough required reading that they have to
Mhm.
read, and they could
Yeah.
kind of step away from all those medical journals,
Mhm.
and enjoy a love story, and also um, just see what really happens on the outside. Not to mention, they may see in their studies, learn what happens to a body
Mhm.
when a body is dying from
Mhm.
a medical perspective.
Yeah.
They're going to learn it about, I don't know, the blood and the capillaries and the organs and da 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 da
Mhm.
da. But they're not going to see it from a wife's perspective
Mhm.
of how, when I talk about the things that I saw happening to Dave and the
Mhm.
changes that I saw in his body in the last few
Mhm.
days, And I think that really humanizes it. I think it
Mhm.
really humanizes it. So, I have a very good friend of mine who she lost her dad. She did home hospice with him. She was his caregiver, and she went through some of the same things that I went through with Dave. And I found out recently when she was reading the book that she never told anybody about it. She never told
Mhm.
anybody about the really difficult things. And she
Mhm.
didn't share it with her husband. And of course, she didn't want to tell her kids because she didn't want to burden them. And she started
Mhm.
crying while we were on the phone. And she's not a crier.
Yeah.
And I said, maybe this book will help you heal too,
Mhm.
because even though you've never been able to say the words of what you went through, knowing that somebody else has gone through this, it's kind of like your words coming out of my
Mhm.
mouth.
Mhm.
And I think that may be helpful to a lot of people that really have suffered in silence.
Mhm.
Home hospice is no joke. And it's,
Yeah.
I would do it the same way. We did it. I would do everything the same. Dave and I wanted him to die at home. We
Mhm.
didn't want him to be in a facility and with,
Mhm.
nurses and things taking care of him. I took care
Mhm.
of him. We had a nurse come once or twice a week.
Mhm.
And that's the way we wanted it to happen. So I would do it the same all over again. I just wish I was a little better prepared for it.
Yeah, and that's what your book is going to do for other people, though. It can
I
better
hope so.
prepare people. I think there's
Yeah.
like there's the finiteness to it, right? Where it's like we know what's going to happen. Like you pick up the book, you know where this is going. But for
Yeah.
somebody who's just entering that experience, it's going to be a hard read. But I think what it you said humanizing before, and my mind had already gone to like it's putting humanity into cancer because it's
Right.
such a big thing that everybody is talking about, but they're not talking about it from a humanistic way. It is so medical and technical and insurance based, and it's like this is bringing humanity back into this conversation. And I want to you mentioned being, and I also agree, like having you be the advocate, like if you could clone yourself for other people to be that person that is relentless and will not take no for an answer, like I think everybody wants somebody like that in their corner if something like this is
Yes,
happening to them. And so I love that the doctors kind of were like, they're probably like, listen, she's a pain in our ass, but she's got his
definitely.
best interest. Like, so there's something really beautiful about them even acknowledging like, yes, like we're glad that you're as on top of it as you are, because I'm sure there's others that just don't have the skill set or the wherewithal or whatever they might not
Right.
have to be able to do that. So that created and formed a relationship with some of the doctors of which you write about. So can we talk about that and then bring it into kind of the proceeds and how what this book
Yeah.
is doing?
Yeah. So we had two primary main doctors. One was a surgeon and one was the oncologist. And Dave had several surgeries. And like I say, I was constantly on them about every little change, every little thing. Of course, Google can be a dangerous place when dealing with medicine because there's all
Mhm.
these other, I don't know, kind of random cures and things that are coming out there. And so we developed a terrific relationship with our doctors. It was a very honest relationship. It was very respectful. They listened to me I mean, of course, let's face it, the wife is the one that always knows. When the husband
Mhm.
goes into the doctor, the doctor looks at the husband and says, how do you feel? And then looks at the wife and says, now, how does he really feel?
Mhm.
It's kind of a given. And, our doctors really had it nailed down to that we developed a relationship. And, our relationship was so good that I asked our doctors to write the foreword for my book. Actually, they're such a part of our lives, and I actually found out after Dave died that I missed them.
Mhm.
Oddly enough, I missed them, and when I went through town, it's about 3 hours away from where I live, and I happened to drive through town, and I saw, the Starbucks that I'd go to after one of our appointments, and I saw one of the offices where Dave would get some treatments done. And I really felt this kind of hollowness. And I
Mhm.
thought, this is so, it became part of my life for three
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
So when I was communicating with them somewhat after Dave had died, and, my oncologist said, you know, I've thought of you many times and I wanted to reach out to you, but I didn't know I didn't know if I would worsen your grief by bringing all the memories back. And which is a whole other thing that we really need to talk about is grief and the way we all handle grief. But so somewhere along the line in writing the book, you know, I decided that although this book was never about money, was never about making money, I didn't care about making money. I didn't care if I ever made a dime from the book. At some point, I decided that I was really wanted to see if I could make a change in the way this cancer is handled. And Dave's cancer, being sinonasal squamous cell carcinoma, is very rare, only about 3,000 cases in the country every year. So it's not profitable for the pharmaceutical companies, and nobody researches it because it's not profitable, because not enough people have it. So there is a fund at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, directly connected to Dave's cancer. It's a skull-based surgery or skull-based and sinonasal cancer fund, which ultimately they will be researching ways to fight this cancer. And most of the proceeds, and not even just the profits, most of the proceeds of the book, a majority of them, will be going directly to this fund at UNC. I've also included a QR code at the end of my book in the event anybody else was really touched by our story to donate. And, you know, you don't have to donate $10,000. You can donate $5, because I have a real belief that every little bit of change makes a difference, you know, and one person really can change the world, you know, for that thing, you know, because one person can start a movement, you know, and ultimately if, you know, so maybe, I don't know, over the life of the book, you know, I donate 50,000, 100,000, 500,000, who knows, depending, you know, maybe 2,000, depending on how successful the book is. But what can I inspire other people to donate that ultimately they can do the research, find some, I mean, I know they're not going to necessarily find a cure, but right now, when you get a diagnosis of this particular cancer, it's not like getting a diagnosis of breast cancer, you know, it's not looking good. And, you know, I'd like to think that if 5 years from now or 10 years from now, you know, there's a husband and a wife and they're sitting in the room waiting for the test results to come back, and the doctor says, well, you know, sir, you have a sinonasal squamous cell carcinoma, and you know, your prospects are really good with this. Your prognosis is good. Now, 5 years ago, it would have been grim. It would have been really grim. But we have had such advances in this type of cancer that that things are looking good. And, you know, to save them from what Dave and I went through. And a lot of other people before us.
Yeah, and there's something beautiful about that, because someone can read this book and have no connection to either of you, and then be able to say, I want to donate in his name, or I'm going to go to another lesser known research cancer. I'm going to make a donation there. Whatever the situation may be, it's still going to improve potential healthcare outcomes for people down the road that you were not fortunate to have access to. And that's a really beautiful mission and kind of message to this, because, you know, we at PYP really try to promote and get people to think about how can we make this philanthropic, and this is like such an organic, really, really great example of how that can work. So it is the David J. Gilbride Foundation, or what's the full
so there's so the link that I have will actually take you to in memory of David J. Gilbride at UNC, and your money would be dedicated directly to that fund. And I don't know if that's something that, I don't know if we can actually post the QR link somehow associated with the video, but kind of, you know, the neat thing about that is that the folks at UNC will be able to give me a quarterly report as to how much money came in to that fund through that link. So in terms of actually knowing how much of a difference can one person make, we really will know. And when I get my website up and running, which is in the works, I will post updates on that, because what greater way for people to see that they're making a difference?
I know. It's inspiring, because it's like, it really is small amounts by a lot of people that can make a huge difference. But I think a lot of times we just feel like our little bit doesn't actually matter, when the reality is that it absolutely matters.
It does. It does.
I love all of this. I'm putting your website on the screen now. So your book is available wherever anyone would like to purchase a book. Eventually, at the time of this recording, your website is not live, but it will be live soon. So if you're watching this and it's 5 weeks from now, or 2 years from now, or 10 years from now, go to the website and, you can get all the links to Patty's book there. And I just also want to acknowledge today is Valentine's Day, and it is not a coincidence that we are recording this on Valentine's Day. So do you want to just kind of end us on that note?
Yeah. It was intentional, actually, that I picked today for us to, to interview. And I actually released the book on National Spouses Day, January 26th, which, unlike Valentine's Day, which is generally about, gifts and hearts and candy, National Spouses Day is actually about having gratitude for the person in your life and spending time with them and showing them how much you care. And actually, I'll tell you today, what I did was I posted on my social media that years ago, when Dave and I first got married, he would buy me a box of chocolate, a box of candy, along with some other, special gift. And one day he went in the box and he saw a bunch of those little wrappers, with no candy, and then all the other wrappers with the candy with a little nibble out of the corner. And he said, what's up with the candy? Did a mouse get in the box? And I said, well, I don't like those. You can have them, or I'm throwing them out. So he started ordering from C's Candies, which this, I don't know if you're familiar with C's, but you can customize your box. So you can, whatever you like, whether you like the creams, the chews, the nuts, the caramel. And not only can you customize your box, you can pick what percentage of caramels and creams and nuts and things. So, so last year, when the C's Candies catalog came in the mail, addressed to Dave, Dave was gone about 4 months at that time. And of course, it was another one of those painful reminders. And I tossed the catalog in the recycling bin, and that was the end of it. And this year I brought it in and I perused it, and I ordered myself a $45 box of customized chocolate. And I thought back to when I said to Dave, hun, you're spending $45 on a box of candy. That's crazy. And he said, well, do you like it, Snooks? Snooks was my name. And short for Snookums, of course. And I said, well, yeah, I know. Yeah, but it's $45. And he said, honey, you're worth it. So, I ended my post by commenting or replicating the words of poet Donna Ashworth. And she says, on those days when you miss your person the most, love yourself harder. Love yourself the way they would love you. And so I think every year on Valentine's Day, I'm going to spend $45 on a box of customized chocolate.
And I think you should. I think that is such a beautiful example of what self-care actually looks like versus these, things that people say are. Like, I think that, what a great quote too.
Yeah, it is.
That's so great. And that is so you're available on Facebook. That's your kind of your communication channel as well. So if someone wants to kind of check you out there, they're welcome to go follow what you're up to and all of those great things.
Absolutely. I am on Instagram too. I'm certainly more of a newbie on Instagram. So I do a bit more, posting on Facebook, and then things are just cross-posted to Instagram. So
that's great. Yeah. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, they can certainly go eventually to your website. They can connect with you on Facebook or on Instagram. I feel like you're fairly simple to find in my experience. Or if you're watching this and you're like, I didn't grab the information, I can't find her, just email us and we'll make the connection for you.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Patty. This was a really good conversation. I really appreciate you and all the stuff that you're up to in this world.
Thanks, Jen.
Conversation.
Thanks for helping me.
Yeah, of course. It was honestly our pleasure. It's kind of like one of those full circle moments where I'm like thinking back to like holding, like my laptop with the manuscript, and then actually physically having this like actually in my hand. Like, it doesn't get old. I say this all the time, but it doesn't get old to actually physically see the outcome of the work together. So yeah. And every time I see a blue butterfly, I obviously think of you and Dave. So
I get a lot of people that say that too. I think that's really cool.
Yeah,
Really cool.
I can't not see them anymore. They're everywhere.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Thank you, Patty. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Jen. Take care.
You too.